Good afternoon to those, many of you. Good morning to some of you on the West Coast. And I'll also say good evening because I think we were supposed to have a few folks from Europe join the call. So greetings, everyone. Just a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about the Food Service Packaging Institute for those of you who are not familiar with us. We are a trade association. We've been around for over 80 years, so you may not have heard about us, but we've been around for quite some time. We are the only trade association in North America that is really only focused on single-use food service packaging products. And we do mean just food service packaging products, and Natha will talk to you a little bit about that. But the other thing that makes us unique is that we consider ourselves material neutral, meaning that we represent the folks making paper products, plastic products, aluminum products. We're really there to advocate for the interests of specifically food service packaging products, no matter what the material is. We're a trade association, and our members really predominantly include the converters and the raw material suppliers, as well as the machinery folks. And it's good to note that our representation for the entire industry is about 85%. So we represent a pretty good portion of the entire industry in North America. The other thing that we offer as far as membership is concerned, we also include food service distributors and operators. So your Cisco's, your U.S. Food Service, your McDonald's, your Starbucks, those types of folks are going to be members of FPI as well. So a little bit of background to get us started today on how we got to this point. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but just so you're aware that we really started our work back in 2011. And the reason that we got together was because the members really recognized that a lot of food service packaging products weren't actually being recovered, you know, whether it was being recycled, whether it was composted, whether they were sent to energy recovery facilities, and there was really an opportunity there. At the same time, we also saw greater interest in sustainability and sustainability initiatives, particularly when it comes to packaging, and in our case, food service packaging. And then finally, what we also really have started to see is increased legislative or regulatory pressures on packaging. And so those things all really came together to provide to us a really good opportunity for FPI members and others to really work collaboratively to figure out how can we increase that recovery of food service packaging. And the other thing, too, that the other benefit for us is that it really helps to show that voluntary efforts really can and will make a very big difference, and that perhaps we don't need something like EPR for packaging, specifically food service packaging, in North America, or I should say in the United States. Unfortunately, our friends to the north have been dealing with this for quite some time. So if we take a look at the background of the work that we've been doing, essentially what happened was that we set up separately funded groups within FPI. So back in 2011, the Paper Recovery Alliance was formed, and that was really a group of companies specifically focused on the recovery of paper food service packaging. As you can imagine, my plastics members a couple months later said, hey, we want to do the same thing. And so the Plastics Recovery Group was formed in 2012. And then most recently, our Foam Recycling Coalition was formed in 2014, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so if you take a look at this slide, what you see here is a list of the members of the Paper Recovery Alliance and or the Plastics Recovery Group. And what you see here is that we actually have everyone from the entire value chain. So everyone from the raw material manufacturers to the converters to the operators are involved here. So a little bit of information to follow up and end on the kind of the background is that there are some pretty basic standards and some thoughts that have really been driving a lot of the recovery work for FPI. We've really been using what we're calling a systems-based approach with a focus on MRF to market end markets. So really it's recognizing that everyone from the entire value chain, from the raw material suppliers all the way to the end markets, need to be involved in this. But our work is specifically focusing on that MRF to the end market. The other thing that we've done is that we've tried to identify what are those barriers that are perhaps hindering recovery of food service packaging. And once we identify those, can we identify some potential solutions as well? The other thing that's been interesting about the work that we've been doing is you'll hear us use the term recovery quite a lot, because in our case, we're really looking at the highest and best use to dictate what type of recovery options are best for us. So it might be recycling in some cases, it might be composting, and or it might be energy recovery as well. You'll note that in the presentation today we've focused a lot of our efforts, at least the initial efforts, on the recycling side. We're going to be doing more on the composting side, but energy recovery is not something that we're throwing out. Absolutely, that's another option for our folks as well. The other thing that's been interesting for us is that our members have been very, very willing and have accepted that we can't have preconceived notions. We need to let some of the learnings and the work that we've been doing help to focus the efforts. So we need to figure out and acknowledge that maybe there's a time to course correct or change some of the work that we've been doing. So a perfect example of this is in the beginning we thought, okay, well, let's just launch a couple of different pilots and that'll take care of everything. And then what we decided to do is we essentially shifted a little bit, and instead of doing a couple of local pilots, let's take a more national, broader approach, because we felt that if we take a more broader approach and look at that whole MRF to market and systems-based approach, that'll help us get to the solutions in a more efficient way and, frankly, more cost-effective. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to FPI's Vice President, Natha Dempsey, who Catherine already mentioned to you. And she actually is the person at FPI who manages all of our recovery efforts. So, Natha, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Lynn. Just so you all know, Lynn and I like to tag team quite a bit, and Lynn likes to chime in, so don't be surprised if you hear her voice again throughout the course of this. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we work very closely with resource recycling systems, so Catherine and Liz and Kelly, who have already been mentioned, to work on our recovery projects, because when we started, we realized that we were moving into new territory for FPI, and we needed experts in the arena to help us and guide us through some of the technical pieces of our project. So the first thing we did is we asked, what are the barriers to increased food service packaging recovery? We talked to MRFs and asked them really, why not food service packaging? And we got a whole host of answers back, and started to work on, okay, well, let's find the answers to these questions or these problems that are being shared. The first question a lot of people asked was, what is food service packaging? Food service packaging is specific. It is single-use food service ware and packaging used by food service establishments. And for the cases of our current project and the current focus of our work, we're really looking at cups, containers, boxes, and bags. A lot of you may be asking, well, why those? Aren't there, things like lids and straws and napkins? Yes, and those are a part of food service packaging, and we are concerned about their whereabouts and where they end up. But if we look at food service packaging, these products comprise the majority of food service packaging based on tons. And when we looked at it, we went through a list of criteria. And one of those, we looked at end markets, we looked at material value, we looked at form and size, we looked at the quality, and then capital investment. And we made decisions that these items would be most likely to be accepted and moved through the system. So we started our focus here. The next thing is we had to figure out how much food service packaging is generated, how much is out there. And so for FPI, this was really an interesting opportunity for us, because prior to this, all of our data is in units, because that's what we focus on. We talk about units. So we're looking at this by ton. And the only other data point we really had when it came down to it was the municipal solid waste study that EPA does. And if you look at that, EPA study says that we're about 1 to 3% of the municipal solid waste stream. Now here's a perception that we are able to sort of break down right away. There's this perceived notion out there that there's a lot of food service packaging in the municipal solid waste stream, when in reality there's very little. So this was all really helpful. So we look at how much is generated. This is really going to help us down the line when we start talking about bales later on. Where's food service packaging found? Well, virtually every food service establishment that you can think of is going to use food service packaging. So we have to look at now, first step to recovery is collection. Where can we collect this? So we started looking at where does it go when it leaves the establishment. Approximately 2/3 of food service packaging ends up in the home or office setting, And that is why we focused primarily on the curbside and residential recycling infrastructure. Oh, and only about 1/3 of food service packaging stays where it's purchased at the front of store, and we'll talk a little bit about why front of store is so important a little bit later on. So one of the things that we decided to do was give ourselves a baseline. So we conducted a benchmarking study. We did a survey of almost 70 MRFs back in the fall of 2013. The reason we include this is because the data was released early in 2014. So we looked at about 70 MRFs in the U.S. and Canada and asked them a whole series of questions about what food service packaging they were accepting. And it turns out that many MRFs are actually accepting food service packaging. The majority of them are taking at least 9 of the 19 types of food service packaging we asked about. And many MRFs are accepting food service packaging even if the communities aren't communicating this to their residents.
And I think this is important to note because as FPI looks to the future of some of the work, one of the things that we're looking to do in the future is actually take a look at, okay, well, if the MRFs are saying they're accepting it, but the municipalities that they're servicing aren't necessarily communicating that, is there an opportunity? So FPI is going to be looking at trying to benchmark some of that information on what municipalities in the United States and Canada are actually accepting food service packaging currently. And again, maybe some opportunities in the future.
So in addition to, is it even recyclable or is it getting recycled, one of the big questions we kept hearing about is, isn't food service packaging too dirty? Doesn't it have too much food on it? Isn't it greasy and gross? Well, so this is something we really wanted to work on. We needed to know if this was a real barrier or just something that was perceived. So we conducted 2 food residue studies to determine whether food service packaging collected at the curbside has more or less contamination than those commonly recycled food items. I think we have spaghetti jars and yogurt containers are listed here. So if you think about those items versus a cup or a container that we talked about in food service. Well, so what we found was that, contrary to popular belief, there's very little to no difference in the residue on food service packaging versus commonly recycled food packaging. And it's important to note that when we did this study, we did one study in Delaware, one study in Boston. In both cases, we found that most of the materials were primarily extremely clean to clean upon review. So that means they were falling in the 1 to 2 range of a 1 to 5 ratio. And as far as the end markets are concerned, these would be accepted. They would be acceptable amounts of contaminants. However, one of the things that we've noted and noticed about the recycling industry as a whole is that there's this growing conversation over the concern of recycling quality. And one of the things that we would really like to work on in 2015, not just at FPI, but with a group of stakeholders, is to talk about recycling quality and where we go and how we can work to help resolve some of the issues there.
And this is Lynn. I'll jump in and just say, FPI honestly is a pretty small trade association, and we're very good at recognizing there are certain things that we can affect change in places that we can't. And frankly, where something is a specific issue to food service packaging and something that's a much broader issue. So the issue of contamination in the recycling stream is a much broader issue. So it's something where we think we can be part of that discussion, but we're not the only ones having that discussion for sure. I'll continue on. Another question that we were hearing from MRFs, and frankly we were asking ourselves, was, okay, so if you can collect the material that's being accepted at the MRFs, is the collected material actually going to end up at the end markets or in the bales where we want it to go? And so one of the things that we're doing to address that question is we're actually a co-sponsor of a material flow study that's currently going on. The other project sponsors are the American Chemistry Council, Association for Post-Consumer Plastics Recyclers, Carton Council, and NAPCOR as well. And there are a whole host of firms that are working on this. Resource Recycling Systems is the primary consultant, and they're being assisted by Reclaim Stewart Edge and More Recycling. And the idea is that the group has funded some work that's gone on where we've gone to 5 different MRFs all over the country with a variety of different sizes, geography, and put some material in. So in some cases, there was material already in the system. In some cases, we had to feed material. But what we're trying to do is see, does the material flow to where we want it to flow to? Where is the natural destination for that material, and is it actually going there? So the results of that study will be coming out in the next couple of months, and we'll be releasing high-level details to the general public. But from SPI standpoint, you know, we really want to try to understand what's happening with food service packaging, and, you know, are there some best practices that we might be able to share with MRF? So if a MRF is interested in accepting food service packaging, and we want to ensure that that food service packaging is going to end up in the correct bale, perhaps there are some tweaks that they need to do to make sure that that does that. So we'll certainly keep you posted as the results of that study come up.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about bales and why bales are so important. Obviously, it's where we want our material to end up. One of the things to note is when we first started this project, before we did the generation numbers, and when I say generation numbers, I do want to specify the fact that we asked our membership to help us provide that generation data. Because we have 85% of the marketplace, it was a pretty good guess that we were coming pretty close to what's actually being generated out there. Just thought I'd clarify.
And we did use multiple data sources, not only our members, so it's a pretty good estimate.
Yeah. But the number one thing about all of that is that we had such low volume, we weren't going to be able to create this wonderful all-encompassing plastic food service bale or paper food service bale. We had to target the current bales that are out there. So if you look at the list that we've got there on the screen, you know, we're looking at PET bottles, thermoforms, mixed plastic bales for 3 through 7s, you know, mixed paper, OCC, carton bales, you know, trying to fit our materials into what exists already. So when we started talking about this, we started thinking about, well, what would be, what would be a recovery rate that would be reasonable? Well, right now our recovery rates are pretty low. So if we said, okay, 10% is a good target. Let's figure out, what that looks like. So we want to see, what does it look like if we put 10% of food service packaging into a bale? So we did some pie charts. And we've tested the estimates on mixed paper bale, and we're going to test the estimates on mixed plastics bale next.
And I think this all just goes back to the MRF concerns. I think the MRFs had the perception that food service packaging was a very large volume item, and that if they turned on the spigot and said, we want to accept food service packaging, and that, oh, by the way, we want to put it into our existing bales, what's it going to do to the existing bales? So that was really the exercise, in really trying to identify what would happen to those existing bales. And again, going back to Natha's point, at this point, our recovery rates are low. So let's do some projections. What does it look like if we hit that 10%? Obviously, we'd like to hit 100%, but it's going to be a few years before we get to that point. So Natha, I'll go back to you.
Sure. So we conducted a bale audit on mixed paper bales to sort of test out this theory. So if we have this future recovery rate of 10%, we've estimated that about 3% would be food service packaging in a mixed paper bale. And this is one of those things that was really interesting for all of us, because there's sort of this belief out there that there's all this paper food service packaging, and folks were really concerned. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be adding all of this, paper into food service paper into my mixed paper bale, and what if it's all polycoat? Because if it's all polycoated, I can't handle that, and it's going to be a real problem. Well, we did some research, and we found out that in food service packaging, only 1/3 is actually polycoated. The rest of it, the other 2/3, is either clay-coated or not coated at all. So let's take a look at this. So if it's 10%, you're looking at 3% of a mixed paper bale that is actually food service packaging, and of that, 1% is going to be polycoated paper, and 2% would be clay or non-coated.
So the chart on the right-hand side of the screen is what we were estimating would happen to a mixed paper bale
at a projection rate of 10%.
Exactly.
So future recovery rate, yes. So we wanted to determine if this was really what was going on. So we took a look at some mixed paper bales from cities that are currently accepting food service packaging. In this case, it's Seattle and New York City, to sort of say, hey, are we hitting the mark, or are we way off? So the bale sort was done in Ann Arbor in October, and they sorted 3 bales of each between New York and Seattle. So yeah, like we said, we're nowhere near a recovery rate of 10%. When we took a look at the bales, it turns out that the total food service paper, food service paper in New York City's bale was 0.28%, and the total paper in food service packaging in Seattle was 0.48%. And so there's really very little food service packaging material overall. There are some reasons for this. Low recovery rates could be one. Both of these cities have composting options, and consumers are being told to compost soiled paper products, so maybe that's where it's going. The other idea is maybe it's not going into the mixed paper bale. Maybe food service packaging is flowing somewhere else, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the MRF study, is to see where things are going. And maybe the factors out there in the real world are very different from these estimates that we came up with.
So it was a good exercise to figure out from a theoretical, this is what we think a bale would look like, and this is what a real bale looks like right now.
So just to ask, Liz Bedard's on the line, and Liz did a lot of work on this. Liz, do you have any comments or anything you'd like to add to what Lynn and I have already chatted about?
Liz is on mute, so I don't know. Perhaps not. Okay, well, we'll just keep on going.
Yeah.
This is Catherine, and I would jump in with one comment, which is just to highlight the fact that even though, for the reasons that you pointed out, and we can only speculate as to kind of how those reasons all play into it, but for those reasons, the total levels of paper-based food service packaging observed in the bales were lower than the projections that reflect a 10% recovery rate. It was interesting to note that the proportions of those different materials and coating types, especially in New York, were fairly consistent with the projections. In Seattle, in a couple of the categories, we saw big differences, and we can surmise that that's related to those applications being more heavily contaminated with food residue and therefore going into Seattle's composting system. But in other words, by and large, they did lend some credibility to the idea that the mix in terms of coatings that you might see in a bale, that those projections were reasonable, and I think still help to speak to the question of how much coating and how much impact would there be in a mixed paper bale.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. This is Liz. Not sure why you couldn't hear me earlier, but one of the things I'd like to comment on as well is the balance of this approach, in that we did desktop estimates, understanding what is generating, understanding what a 10% recovery rate would look like, and understanding the mixed paper bales. And so we came up with a 3% estimate. And then I think it's really important to ground estimated work in real life. And that was what was wonderful about these bale audits, is taking 2 real-life cities that are collecting this material, and they are putting it in mixed paper bales. What does that look like? And here is the information on your screen. So I just want to comment on the fact that this project has tried to ground all of their information as much as possible in reality.
Thanks, Liz.
Just one more thing to mention on the bale sorts. We did mention mixed plastics. We are actually jumping on and participating in one little section of APR's mixed plastics bale sort, and so that's their project. But we'll have information regarding cups and color coming to us soon. So on the end markets, well, we have to identify where the end markets are for food service packaging. So what we did is we actually have a map, the map that you see on the screen. There is a map, or there are maps for potential end markets located on the FPI website, which we will give you the URLs at the end of the presentation. But just a quick plug that is there, and it is, you can click on those little buttons and you can actually see who's doing it and what materials, and it's just a very unique tool, and we hope you guys can check it out for us. But we want to identify the end markets for food service packaging, and we need as much of it as possible. We want to get materials recovered and moved to the system as best we can, as Lynn mentioned earlier, highest and best use. But we do know that each have different characteristics in terms of the processing and markets, and there's going to be some differences. So basically, what we want to know is there opportunity here? Is there opportunity for growth? Are MRFs interested in adding materials?
I'll take it over from there. I think that's an interesting question for a lot of MRFs. MRFs are talking about, okay, what materials do I want to start accepting? And, the reality is that the materials that are in the recycling stream are absolutely changing. And, perhaps now is a very good time to take a look at food service packaging as something that you add in there. And there's some very good reasons. We also know that a lot of public officials have a number of different environmental goals. A lot of folks are saying, hey, we want to try to hit zero waste. Well, this is an opportunity to start adding more materials into that composting stream or that recycling stream instead of being sent to landfill. And I think it also helps strengthen that supply both for the MRFs as well as the end markets. We're seeing a lot of other groups put money and effort and time into how do you increase the materials that are out there so that you can have more recycled content in materials. So this is another good opportunity. And I mentioned the interest in growing use of recycled materials. I will say that in some cases, food service packaging, you might recycle it. It might not end back up into a food service package. It might end up as something like a picture frame or a park bench or something else, but it can be recycled into something else. But the other thing is, I think and it's the topic that we've been having in a lot of different circles, we all need to talk more about how recycling and composting, any type of recovery work, frankly, just makes good business sense. We all understand and appreciate the fact that you're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart. You're doing it because it makes a difference to your bottom line. And I think if we all work to make sure that we're showing that, I think that's certainly beneficial for everyone.
So one of the great examples that we've seen here is pizza box recovery, pizza box recycling. There's sort of this pervasive myth out there that pizza boxes are not recyclable, that they're not wanted, that they're bad news. So when we did our benchmarking survey, one of the things that we discovered, if you look at the overview, I think it even says it in there, but it's one of the most readily accepted products by MRFs in our benchmarking survey. In fact, over 80% of the MRFs that we talked to accepted pizza boxes. Well, that prompted a little bit more review. And so we had RRS working on this for us on our behalf, and they did just an informal study of the top 10 North American OCC markets. And what they found was that there's really no problem with pizza boxes. Nearly all of the markets are readily accepting OCC bales containing pizza boxes. Pizza boxes are easy to include in single-stream curbside recycling programs. And although it's perceived as a big concern for mills, moderate amounts of grease and cheese, which would be the two things you're thinking of, they're not problematic. So as that all culminates together, and then we have recycled paper mills looking for new sources of fiber, and OCC is in high demand, we really kind of have the perfect storm here. And we've really taken something that was perceived to be not recyclable and turned it into a reality of, yeah, it is, and it's wanted material.
It's a perfect example of, identifying some of these barriers. Are they real or perceived? And, can you overcome the real ones, and can you overturn the perceived barriers, which then leads us to what our plans are for 2015.
So what's next for us in 2015? I say this all the time. We've been doing our homework, and I know Lynn uses the same phrase. We think it's very accurate to describe the way in which we've been working. We've tried to be very thoughtful and complete in answering these questions that people keep asking us. And we feel like we've done our work, and now it's time to move on to the next chapter and start communicating the fact that food service packaging items are indeed recyclable, and potentially encourage folks to accept food service packaging in residential curbside programs. So we're planning some targeted outreach to communities and MRFs and end markets, and not only sort of broad scale type items, but we do plan on having one-on-one conversations because we understand the importance of the relationship and that, you know, not one size doesn't fit all. We want to make sure that we're communicating one-on-one as well as broad sweeping so that we can have these conversations and work through the questions together. And then also through general outreach through media, webinars, presentations like the one you're attending right now.
Yes, perfect. And we took a look at the list of who was going to be participating in this webinar, and we were thrilled to see so many different communities and MRFs on the call. So you can probably bet that many of you on the call will be getting follow-up conversations with us in the future. So just warning you now. So what else are we doing in 2015? You know, we've talked a lot about the recycling front, but composting is equally important. FPI participates in some of the U.S. Composting Council activities, and that's really been what we've been doing up until now. But in 2015, we want to take a far more active approach in what we're doing. So at this point, what we're doing is try to identify, use that same approach of what are the barriers and the potential solutions to increase composting this time, not necessarily just recycling of food service packaging. So we're in the process of identifying those right now, but we know they kind of fall into some major buckets. You know, it's the collection issue. It's what kind of processing infrastructure is out there specifically for food service packaging. You know, what are the end markets? Again, same thing on the composting side as on the recycling side. You know, we need to get that message out that the composters, you know, are not there to just accept all these materials to be recovered. They're there to sell a product. They're there to sell their compost. And what goes into their facilities has a direct impact on the material that they sell out of that. So it's incumbent on all of us in the stream to work together to make sure that we're all going to succeed and that there's that good, profitable product at the very end. So standards and labeling, very important for anybody who's been involved in many of the composting discussions. And then education. I think that's going to be a big one. Education is equally important in recycling as it is in composting. But there's a lot of work that still needs to be done throughout the supply chain. I think particularly within the food service operators themselves on really helping them to understand what to look for when they're trying to identify compostable packaging, as well as helping to educate the consumers that the product can be composted in this case. So that's it for composting. So you'll hear a lot more from us on that in the next couple of months. Another item for 2015, we mentioned that in-store piece, and that's very important, no question, particularly for the brands that rely so heavily on food service packaging. And as much as we would love to have tackled that in-store piece immediately, because that's certainly a lot more fun, we had to do our homework first. You know, we needed to make sure that that infrastructure was there and that the MRFs would be accepting it and the end markets would be accepting it, and frankly that the communities would be accepting it in their programs, because we know so much of food service packaging leaves the store. For example, in a typical quick service restaurant, roughly 75% of the packaging leaves the store either through carry-out or delivery or somebody just taking their stuff to go. So, you know, it was really, unfortunately, we had to get a lot of the work done first, but now we're in a position where we're ready to start reaching out to the operators. And so what we've done is we're actually partnering with the National Restaurant Association. They're actually working to develop specifically a recycling and composting toolkit for food service operators. And it's really going to talk about both the front and back of house. And it's going to include information on food service packaging as well as other types of materials, even like food waste, in that toolkit. So, you know, we want to be able to share with the NRA the learnings that we've had through the PRA and PRG, as well as we know there are a number of brands out there who have been doing tremendous work on in-store recycling and composting. So how can we take that company-specific information and really broaden it and allow other food service operators throughout North America to use that? So that's another step that you'll be seeing from us in 2015. So we've been talking a lot about the work of the PRA and PRG, but FPI's newest group is the Foam Recycling Coalition, so I'll turn it back over to Natha for that.
Sure. So the Foam Recycling Coalition. Well, what about foam for food service packaging? This is something we all hear a lot about. And we sort of have this recognition that polystyrene foam food service packaging had different challenges to increase recovery, most of which center around technical barriers such as equipment or need for technical assistance. And also there's sort of this perceived barrier that we'll talk a little bit about in a minute regarding end markets. So there was a need for additional work. And that led to the formation of another separately funded special interest group called the Foam Recycling Coalition. Just to be clear, this is not a subset of the Paper Recovery Alliance or the Plastics Recovery Group, or Plastics Recovery Group. Yes, I said that right. Wow. This is a separate entity unto itself, and these are the member companies. So what we wanted to do was establish and fund a multi-year grant program to help increase public access to post-consumer foam recycling through curbside or drop-off programs. So we want to drive the actual recovery of foam, and we want to generate success stories to document and utilize in a number of communications to a variety of stakeholders. So those are the three biggies here. We want to increase foam, access to foam recovery, drive actual recovery of foam, and communicate the successes. Target materials, cups, containers, and dinnerware, so think food service packaging, transport packaging, and additionally meat trays and egg cartons.
I'll speak to that real quickly because you might be saying meat trays, egg cartons is not food service packaging. You're right, it's not. But I mentioned FPI has been around for over 80 years. Over the years, we've acquired other associations. So we have a couple separate divisions within FPI that look that focus on meat trays and egg cartons. And because you find foam meat trays and foam egg cartons, that's going to be wrapped into the program as well. And then transport packaging is equally important. Natha, did you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, the reason why we're looking at transport packaging is transport packaging, there's a lot more of it out there because remember, if all food service packaging is only 1 to 3% of the municipal solid waste stream, you can just imagine how small the foam piece is. So there's more transport packaging out there, and new innovations in foam recycling have allowed transport packaging to be recycled with something like food service packaging. So it's just a good opportunity for us to add another material in and get more material recycled. So eligible applicants for our grant program will be both private and public and in the U.S. or Canada. And recipients will receive funding for equipment and technical assistance. You will be seeing more about this very soon. The call for applications will be early in 2015, and grants will be announced hopefully soon after that in spring of 2015.
So Natha really talked about that that real barrier, which is the technical aspect or perhaps the machinery that's needed to densify the foam to get it to the end markets. But I would say one of the perceived barriers for recycling more polystyrene foam is the belief that there wasn't an end market for that recovered material. So that drove us to conduct a study. We hired a third-party consulting company to take a look at the current infrastructure and the current market for recycled polystyrene foam and polystyrene. And so what they found in the report that they did for us was that they identified nearly 140 processors, recyclers, and end users in the United States and Canada. So that was a far greater number than we were expecting, to be honest with you. But it shows that there are people out there looking for this material. The other aspect to the report was the consultant poured through a number of different reports that had been publicized, and what it really did was identify that there actually is a growing domestic and international demand for recycled polystyrene and EPS. I will tell you that the study results, the complete study results are available on our website, and the link is there. So if you're interested in that, please take a look at it. So with that, questions or comments?
So this is Catherine again, and I'm going to monitor the comment panel or the question panel. So if you have questions, and I see that a few of you do, please type them in there, and we'll get those addressed as time allows. I'll start it off with a clarifying question here. Perhaps Lynn or Natha could speak to this, and it was about one of the statistics that you shared in the first part of the presentation. And the question is, does the 1 to 3% of municipal solid waste quoted include all the food service packaging, or just the portion that's collected on-site in food service locations?
It's all food service packaging. So EPA likes to hide some of their numbers. You have to dig pretty far deep, but you do find the categories of paper food service packaging and plastic food service packaging, and those are generation numbers. So EPA did they have their own data, and then SPI actually did its own study a couple of years ago, but both studies found it was definitely under 3% of all municipal solid waste that's generated.
And to be fair, we used Franklin, who is the consulting firm that the EPA actually uses, and we based our study. We went actually a little bit more in depth, but we paralleled our study to the EPA report.
Right, and then so of that total volume, the majority of it actually goes out of the store and arises as waste in a setting like the home or the workplace.
Correct.
All right, thank you. The next question is about compostable food service packaging, and also relates to disposal practices. So there are more and more companies offering compostable food service packaging. What happens to it in the waste stream?
Well, we would like to believe that it's being composted, but in all honesty, there is certainly a number of different compostable items that are being put into landfills because they're not being composted instead. So, but that is incumbent on, number one, availability of products. There are certainly available compostable food service packaging products. The operator is purchasing those products, and then the consumers understanding that they should take those products and to compost them instead of store them in their trash.
The next question here might be a good one for Liz. It's about Operation Green Fence, and the question is, aren't MRFs trying to make sure their bales are very clean?
Yes. Catherine, can you hear me first?
I can, thanks.
Okay, great. Yes, Operation Green Fence has resulted in MRFs having a stronger focus on clean plastic bales, particularly non-bottle plastic bales, so not PET bottles, not HDPE bottles, because the good majority of that material does go overseas. However, this is an opportunity to close in the food contamination study. Food service packaging is no dirtier than food contact recyclables, so including food service packaging in a non-bottle bale shouldn't have an impact on the cleanliness of that bale.
Or the value, right?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Had a request here to show the URLs again, so perhaps you can put that slide up for people to look at. Someone else asking where the application and other information about the FRC grant program can be found. That is available on the web page at the stewardship page that you see there, first URL on that slide.
Not yet.
But I was just going to
yeah.
add the general information about the FRC program is there. Right now, the information for the program itself with the application hasn't been published yet, but I'm sure there will be a link to it on that site once it is.
Yeah, and we'll also be doing an announcement, and I would assume that most of you would be on a list for a press release of that nature.
What else you got, Catherine?
A question here on whether the group is doing any work on organics. And
so I think getting back to the comment that I made earlier, FPI is very singularly focused on food service packaging, and that's what we want to focus our efforts on. However, we recognize that there is growing interest in organics collection, so there's clearly a parallel path there. So we anticipate that we would end up working with folks like the U.S. Composting Council, the Food Waste Reduction Alliance, folks like the National Restaurant Association, other folks who are very much interested in increasing organics collection and how the packaging can play a role. We know that the composters are really looking for those organics, and that the packaging can enable more food waste. but we also need to make sure that we're working together so that we're creating a valuable material for the composters in the end. So the answer is yes, in a roundabout way.
Thank you. Another question, are there any partnerships being arranged with large chain restaurants?
Well, if you go back and you take a look at our members, you'll notice that we do actually have a number of food service operators who are members of the Paper Recovery Alliance and Plastics Recovery Group. So you'll see Chick-fil-A mentioned here, you'll note that McDonald's is here, you'll note that Starbucks, Tim Hortons, White Castle, and Yum are all active participants within the Paper Recovery Alliance and Plastics Recovery Group.
In addition, we're also working with the National Restaurant Association on that front of store piece, and I'm certain that that will involve a number of restaurants. Yeah.
This is an easy crowd. Any hard questions for us?
Well, we're warming up to those.
Okay.
So here's a good one for you. How will you reconcile the inevitable confusion that identical-looking food service packaging are either recyclable or compostable, especially given that consumer education is very difficult in a brief visit to a food service setting?
Well, that's all going to come down to consumer education, obviously, and that's going to be part of that next discussion, next level of work. But to be honest with you, I think it's fantastic when you've got a package that can be both recycled or composted. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I completely understand that there is confusion out there.
I think there's confusion out there right now.
Yep.
So,
Here's another one related to front of store. What actions are being taken to increase the recovery rate of packaging collected at the food service location?
To be honest with you, it's been limited, and there's a very good reason. Again, going back to the tonnage and volume of food service packaging that's out there, if you talk to most food service operators, and a number of them do their own waste audits, so they know what type of materials they have. I want to say that I heard that 70% of their waste comes from back of house, and 30% is front of house. So let's start with that figure. So if you're a food service operator and you want to start recovering more material, you're going to start back of house most likely because that's where the bulk of the material is. So then you go to that front of house, so you're talking 30%. We shared with you that 75% of that 30% leaves the store, so it's going to be a very small amount of material at the very front. So I think a lot of folks try to get the biggest bang for their buck, and if you're trying to recover material, you're going to start back of house first and then move to front of house. But I'm hoping that in our work with the National Restaurant Association and helping educate the operators on how to include front of store recycling and composting, that we'll see that change in the future.
Thank you. So I'd invite more questions. We've got a couple more here, and we do have some more time. If there are other folks with questions, please go ahead and enter those. In the meantime, I'll follow up with a comment that does relate to education and kind of some of these perceived barriers throughout the value chain. As we were doing the work on the benchmarking, and again in talking to MRFs and other conversations, as well as to end markets, one of the things that we observed at various points in the project is that while obviously FPI and the food service industry and packaging industries think in terms like food service packaging, MRFs and end markets and consumers really don't think with that distinction in mind. So in terms of, what that means for education, there are some gaps around the common vocabulary, and, our education and communications need to bridge those gaps.
yeah, Catherine, you're breaking up a little bit there. I'm not sure if it's phone line or microphone related, but yeah, Catherine, just to add a comment to your comment, one of the things that we have talked about also for 2015 that we didn't happen to mention in the slides, it's probably oversight, was the fact that one of the findings we had was terminology is definitely an issue and an area for collaboration, because everybody's calling something different, and we want to make sure that we have a harmonized glossary of terms so that everybody understands exactly what we're speaking of when we talk about some of these products and things.
And I think it's incumbent on us, and I think it's something that we want to do, is as we reach out to more communities to say, hey, would you consider accepting food service packaging, we'd like to offer some best practices and some guidelines and say, hey, perhaps here are some graphics you could use. This is how you might want to communicate this, because we know for sure that what a raw material supplier or a converter of a product may call something is going to be very different than what an operator calls it versus what a MRF calls it versus what that ultimately what that consumer calls it. So yeah, we got some work to do. This is a progress update. It's not we have solved all the world's problems when it comes to food service packaging at this point. So we want to be clear about that.
So one of the attendees is asking if there's a list of the MRFs accepting food-soiled pizza boxes. And I can respond to that. We don't have a list, a comprehensive list of MRFs. The information that we had was based on a survey of around 70 MRFs. But although those that participated did so with the understanding that their information would only be shared in the aggregate, I think if you have a question about a specific MRF, you'd be welcome to contact us.
And then also note that on that interactive end markets map that Natha pointed to, there is a section for OCC, so you will see OCC end markets.
I think, too, you'll find that MRFs and programs in dealing with any of these materials, pizza boxes or other food service or food contact packaging, will emphasize across the board that it should be clean. And so while it's true that you know, a certain amount of food soilage is typical and is accepted by MRFs and end markets, the emphasis in the communications materials still needs to be to encourage consumers to recycle clean, dry materials. And I think what you'll see when you look at MRFs and program materials is that they have that type of language. It doesn't mean that they're not accepting any pizza boxes or ones with minimal amount of food residue. Another question here is around compostable materials, and the person asks, isn't it true that putting compostable material with standard recycling will contaminate that process?
No, I don't believe so.
I might chime in here. They may be thinking about plastics, and there is some concern about compostable plastics being included with plastics, standard recyclable plastics. So certainly not for paper. Paper is very compostable, but for plastics this might be a concern.
Yeah, I think I would distinguish too between putting it in the stream at the point of collection versus putting it in, you know, a bale or in a downstream reprocessing situation. So it might be collected quite successfully, and so putting it in at the point of where the consumer discards the packaging should not create the issue. But it's true, and I see another comment in the question panel about that. It's true that there are issues around contamination, you know, post separation.
Any other questions, Catherine?
We have a question here as to whether there's been a study to access or to assess the amount of food-contaminated food service packaging that's coming from commercial front-of-house versus back-of-house sorting stations, things like food courts and office buildings.
The short answer to that is no. We have not done that. Not yet, at least. Liz, I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
No, I don't.
but I think there's a real opportunity from a standpoint of if people are looking to collect more organics, you know, what kind of, at least for recycling, are they combining their compostable products, or if it's a recyclable product and a compostable product and the food, there may be some opportunities there to help keep the stream clean.
There's a question here on whether we have a feeling of how much the standard recycling is contaminated with food. For example, plastic bottles and containers. Liz, you were on site for the food residue sort. Do you want to comment on that?
As Lynn mentioned earlier, recyclables contamination is a problem in general. It's not a problem specific to food. We need to be better at educating our residents on what should be recycled. I think with time it's just going to become mainstream, but at this point we do have a general issue with contamination. But during the sort, I did not see that it was specific to food contamination. It's a more broader issue, and again, that sort focused entirely on, does food service packaging have more contamination than regular food contact containers like a yogurt container or a spaghetti sauce jar? And the answer to that was no.
Thank you. The next question is FPI working with the How to Recycle folks over at SPC to try to get food service packaging manufacturers to better mark their packaging?
The shorter answer is no, not specifically on that, but we do work with Sustainable Packaging Coalition from time to time on projects that are of interest to both of our members.
Yeah, and I would add that there are quite a few people who participate in both groups as well.
And Lynn and Catherine, I might also add that although Food Service Packaging Institute as an organization is not working on that labeling, I think many of your members are as individual companies.
Correct.
Yes, so it is happening, just not through the trade association, more as individual companies.
I think we might have time for one more question, another one related to labeling. Someone asks how to compost would be a good mark for all the clay coat food service packaging. Do you see something like this in the future? If 2/3 of that material is uncoated or clay coated, why not label them as compostable?
Good question, but I think that's going to speak to how do you label something compostable, why you label something compostable, does it meet ASTM standards? So my guess is a number of those products probably already are labeled compostable because they've been certified by groups like BPI and tested by other third-party organizations.
Well, and as we spoke of earlier, highest and best use possible. It may not be that composting is the answer for all clay-coated or uncoated paper products. It might be something else.
It all depends on the local situation.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point, and on the application too. So I guess to wrap up, since we're coming up on the hour, someone asked if we'll be sending out today's PowerPoint to participants. No, we will not, but a recording will be made available shortly on the website. And you can check the URL that you see on the screen for that. So thank you all for your participation, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.